I'm Jason UFC, and today we have a story about Joe Rogan reacts to Khamzat Chimaev getting a real middleweight fight at UFC Saudi Arabia. Joe Rogan says Robert Whittaker is a big dude. Longtime UFC color commentator Joe Rogan is pleased to have seen Khamzat Chimaev booked in a, quote, real test at 185-pound UFC middleweight division. Okay, so let's just skip all of this. Skip it. Let's get straight into the article. Joe Rogan, Khamzat Chimaev is facing a real 185-pounder in Robert Whittaker. During a recent episode of his podcast, The Joe Rogan Experience, the longtime UFC color commentator reacted to confirmation of the main event for the UFC debut event in Saudi Arabia. Having seen Khamzat Chimaev break into the UFC middleweight rankings with a majority decision victory over Kamaru Usman, Joe Rogan is excited to see Khamzat Chimaev have his credentials in the UFC middleweight division tested against a legit 185-pounder like Robert Whittaker. This is what Joe Rogan says. This one, Robert Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev in Saudi Arabia, that one is going to be wild. That's a wild one. That's a wild fight. Whittaker versus Khamzat Chimaev is legit. That's a real fight. That's a real fight for Khamzat Chimaev because Robert Whittaker is a big dude. Robert Whittaker, a big, beefy middleweight, former UFC middleweight champion. That's a real 185-pounder opposed to UFC gave Kamaru Usman they gave Kamaru Usman to Khamzat Chimaev, and Kamaru Usman did not have a chance to fully prepare for that fight. I think he took the fight on, what was it, 7 days notice, 10 days notice, 12 days notice? I can't remember. But this is what Joe Rogan said to finish this article. This is a big one. This is Robert Whittaker with plenty of time to prepare, a guy who is just as legit as they get, who Robert Whittaker just defeated Paulo Costa, Joe Rogan says. And I believe that's the end of the article. You can see down here, Khamzat Chimaev posted a tweet on his Twitter of him in black and white with Robert Whittaker. A pretty cool photo there. I do want to preface this by saying I am a MMA casual, so I cannot remember all of this stuff that goes on in this sport. But when I first saw this line, I saw Khamzat Chimaev. Last time I saw this line, it was Khamzat Chimaev was a favorite. Like, he was a pretty big favorite. It was like minus 165, minus 170. I mean, lines change everywhere, but I don't see Khamzat Chimaev as the underdog. And when I first heard of this fight, I thought Khamzat Chimaev would be the underdog in this fight. I do believe this is his first main event in the UFC. I believe he was scheduled for a main event versus Nate Diaz in 2022, like September of 2022. It's supposed to be Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz in the welterweight division, but Khamzat Chimaev ended up coming in 78 pounds. Was that last year? I don't think that was last September right now. That was in 2022. But yeah, Khamzat Chimaev and Nate Diaz were scheduled for a main event. And then Khamzat Chimaev in the welterweight division, Khamzat Chimaev, I believe he came in 7, 8, 9 pounds overweight. So Nate Diaz ended up fighting Tony Ferguson. Khamzat Chimaev ended up fighting Kevin Holland in a catchweight fight. Khamzat Chimaev submitted Kevin Holland in the first round of that fight. But that was in the first round of that fight. This was not in like the third or fourth or fifth round. So from what I remember, of what I understand, like I said, I am a casual, so don't hold me to all of this. But I believe this would be Khamzat Chimaev's first time, at least in the UFC, in rounds 4 or 5. So I'm favoring Robert Whittaker for that reason. Also, like when we looked at Khamzat Chimaev versus Kamaru Usman moving up to the middleweight division on very, very short notice. Robert Whittaker, former UFC middleweight champion, he's already built for the middleweight division. Kamaru Usman, I believe, won at least round 3, I think, right? When I watched the fight, I think I gave at least one round to Kamaru Usman I think there was one judge that scored it even or something like that. I believe it was two judges scored it for Khamzat Chimaev. I can't remember. But I gave one round for the third and final round to Kamaru Usman. That was a 3-round fight. Another fight where we saw Khamzat Chimaev in the third round was versus Gilbert Burns, and I gave Gilbert Burns the third round in that fight also. Khamzat Chimaev clearly won the first round and the second round versus Gilbert Burns, but I thought Gilbert Burns won that third round pretty convincingly. And the same thing with Kamaru Usman. You would say, hey, what would the fight look like versus Khamzat Chimaev had the fight versus Burns going 5 rounds, the fight versus Kamaru Usman going 5 rounds. You know, he didn't finish Burns. He did not finish Kamaru Usman. So all those fights went to a decision. The fight with Kevin Holland was finished in the first round. And obviously he wasn't in great shape because he came in overweight for a welterweight fight. But for the reason of that, I'm going to favor Robert Whittaker in this fight. I think Robert Whittaker in rounds 3, 4, 5, even if Robert Whittaker loses, you know, that first round, if Khamzat Chimaev doesn't put Robert Whittaker out like Dricus du Plessis did, I don't see Khamzat Chimaev getting better, getting stronger in those later rounds versus Robert Whittaker. But you know what? We have not seen Khamzat Chimaev in rounds 4 or 5, so we have to see. But I favor Robert Whittaker in that fight. Is a few things I do want to question about what's going on with the UFC. Why did they make this fight in particular? Khamzat Chimaev is not ranked in the top 10 in the middleweight division. What does this win do for Robert Whittaker? Where is Sean Strickland? Why did the UFC not make Sean Strickland versus Robert Whittaker? UFC 305, I believe they just announced it's not going to be in Miami. Let me just say that one more time. UFC 305 is not going to be in Miami. It's going to be in Australia, right? Perth, Australia. I believe. I cannot believe that the UFC missed that opportunity to not take UFC 305 to Miami. For some reason, they're going to Australia. A lot of people are assuming that, you know, the main event will be Israel Adesanya versus Dricus du Plessis. I'm just going to say this one time and one time only. I do not believe Israel Adesanya deserves another title rematch, but we're just going to move on from that. But where is Sean Strickland in this situation? Why did the UFC not make Robert Whittaker versus Sean Strickland? That seemed like the fight to make. Both of them are ranked in the UFC top 5 in the middleweight division. And like I said, Khamzat Chimaev is not ranked in the top 10. Is Sean Strickland going to fight Jared Cannonier? Is he going to fight Marvin Vittori? Right? I don't see Sean Strickland fighting Paulo Costa. That wouldn't make much sense. But where's Sean Strickland in this middleweight division? Is Israel Adesanya back? And who does Dricus du Plessis fight next? Who knows? There's a lot going on. But let me know your opinion of this fight. Who do you think is going to win? Like I said, personally, I think rounds 3, 4, and 5 probably could pretty easily go to Robert Whittaker. So I'm going to favor Robert Whittaker team. Bobby Knuckles. I'm Jason. UFC today we had a story about Joe Rogan reacts to Khamzat Chimaev versus Robert Whittaker at UFC Saudi Arabia in June. I believe it's in June, right? Let me know who do you think is going to win. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the $1 donation button, and please tune in to the next video on this channel. Thanks a million for watching.